Railroads revolutionized America, helping turn a land of farms and woods into a great industrial nation, where a few became very wealthy, while their workers suffered long days under adverse and dangerous conditions for just pennies an hour. In 1901, the signal maintenance workers, skilled composite mechanics working for the Pennsylvania Railroad out of the yards in Altoona, were on call 24 hours a day for a wage of just 14 cents an hour. No overtime, no benefits. They believed they could do better if they had a union. And here in the interlocking tower in the Altoona yard, they formed Mountain Lodge No. 1 of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen of America. And this became our union.
Gives you a very good feeling to be here where we originally started back in 1901. To think back what those signalmen probably had to go through to even have their organization begin. And the secrecy of meeting, and you couldn't have unions. And so they started it as a fraternal organization, and that way they could hold their meetings and everything.
A small union of skilled workers has survived and thrived and continues to fight for the same things they did. I think about the fact that they were looking for training back 100 years ago and looking for wages to separate them from the common laborers of those days. It was really a dirty, dirty job out here. And in some ways it's the same. You look down the railroad here, that's the same, it's a steel rail and wood ties and stone ballast, just like it was 100 years ago.
We do mechanical work, we do electronic work, we do electrical work, we do all of it. I mean, and we also do the digging if it's needed to put in the track wires or whatever the case may be. We still have to do that also, and so that maintainer may face every one of those things in one day.
The hand-drawn charter forming the Brotherhood survives today. Its author, H.G. Detweiler, was our first chief signalman and presiding chairman. When he informed Superintendent Wallace that they'd organized, the members received an immediate raise in pay to 24.6 cents an hour. Success in Altoona led to other locals on the Pennsy. And signalmen on other railroads began to organize. By 1908, the independent locals joined together, forming the Grand Lodge of the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen, as recorded in the minutes for February 9th, 1908.
Even when we began, our industry, they had to hide to be a union. They called us a fraternal organization to even meet because of the fear that the railroads would find out that they were creating a union.
That same year, Congress approved the Federal Employers Liability Act, FELA, to provide compensation to railroad workers injured on the job. In 1911, we became an international union when the first Canadian local was established on the Michigan Central. And in 1913, Wilmot J. Pettit, a Canadian, was elected Grand Chief Signalman. Early lodge meetings stressed harmony, unity, and the solemn obligations of brotherhood. The young union was on the move. In 1914, the Brotherhood affiliated with the American Federation of Labor, led by trade unionist Samuel Gompers, who founded the AFL. In the face of constant opposition from the railroads, our union continued to grow, slowly moving west. Daniel Webster Helt was elected Grand Chief Signalman in 1917 to head a proud, expanding union that was rich in promise, but not much else. I was entrusted with all the possessions of the organization, consisting of a gavel, a ballot box, a battered suitcase, and some unpaid bills. Thomas A. Austin, Secretary-Treasurer. World War I was a railroad war, but with several hundred independent railroads in the country, the demands of wartime operation threw the industry into chaos. To solve the crisis, President Woodrow Wilson took over the railroads. His Director General of Railroads, W.G. McAdoo, issued General Order No. 8 in 1918, which outlawed the common practice of firing union activists. It became our Bill of Rights. By the 1919 convention in Kansas City, more than 100 new lodges had been formed, and membership had risen to more than 13,000. The 20s brought good times to post-war America. The Signalman's Journal began publishing in 1920, bringing Union news to members. And the Grand Lodge moved its headquarters from Washington to Chicago because the newly formed Federal Railroad Labor Board was located there. But in spite of a national agreement covering all Signal Department employees on railroads under federal control, national political changes rolled back many of the wage gains signalmen had made. And then came the Great Depression. Businesses closed. Manufacturers stopped producing goods. Railroads were hit hard. Trains stood idle. And workers everywhere were laid off. Many took to riding the rails from city to city looking for work. Bank closures left our union nearly broke. But the railroad bosses, determined to continue paying the interest on their bonds, ruthlessly reduced wages for rail workers. The only good thing to come out of this period was the start of industry-wide handling of wage disputes and other important issues. In 1934, delegates to our convention elected the legendary Art Lyon Grand President of the Brotherhood, while the inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt the year before brought the start of a New Deal and huge improvements for labor. For the first time, government was consistently on our side. In 1934, company unions were outlawed as part of major amendments to the Railway Labor Act, improvements we had been fighting for since the act was first approved in 1926. By 1935, normal wages were restored. The Washington Agreement of '36 provided basic employee protection, especially in the case of mergers. The Signal Inspection Act was passed over the fierce objection of the railroads. A national pension system, railroad retirement, was enacted by Congress, followed by railroad unemployment insurance. Then, once again, our world was devastated by war. The effect was first felt by Canadian locals in 1939, with a government policy of controls on prices, profits, and wages. Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. Thousands of our members joined the service, and the Brotherhood kept them as members in good standing, protecting their seniority and other rights. Railroads were crucial to the war efforts. In many cases, the wives of signal maintainers serving in the armed forces replaced their husbands on the job, becoming our equivalent of Rosie the Riveter. To prevent strikes, emergency arbitration of labor disputes was instituted, a policy that continues today. In Europe, as the Allies recaptured territory that had been held by the Germans, railway battalions, which included signalmen, worked furiously to repair the bombed-out and sabotaged railroads. They got the trains running again, bringing supplies to our soldiers at the front. And then it was over. The greatest generation returned to take up their lives in peace and prosperity. In 1945, the Railroad Labor Executives Association asked Brotherhood President Art Lyon to head its Washington office, and Jesse Clark became president of the Brotherhood. The railroads prospered for the rest of the 40s, but their workers did not. It is often said that what railroad companies called a personnel department was actually a war department whose primary function was to fight the unions. Nevertheless, in 1949, we finally won the fight for a 40-hour week. For America's signalmen, the 50s brought a sense of stability. But there were big changes on the horizon as America chose to expand its transportation system in ways other than railroads. Rail traffic decreased, but this did not cause a severe problem for signalmen. Our work must be done no matter how many trains are actually running. But we still had to live in those hated camp cars when working down the track.
There was 10 beds in a little boxcar and 10 lockers, about 3 sinks, and 1 shower.
If it had snowed that weekend, why we had to scrape the snow off our beds before we could go to bed. The camp cars was that bad.
Whit Harwell and his bride spent the first 6 months of their marriage living in a camp car.
We got to the boxcar, and there's about 8 or 10 steps. Unlocked it, and I carried her up those steps, and we spent the night in that car on a rollaway bed. That's what we had. And we had an ice box, and we used a Coleman stove to do our cooking.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
The 60s were a time of great hope and a time of great tragedy and turmoil. The railroads went into decline. By the late 60s, the total railroad workforce had dropped from 1.5 million to less than 700,000 workers. And the railroads still refused to recognize signalmen as skilled workers and lumped us in with all other non-ops. The decade of the 70s brought many changes. For the Brotherhood, it was time to resolve the issues of working conditions, wages, and respect. It all came to a head in 1971 when BRS President C.J. Chuck Chamberlain led the union in a nationwide strike.
Railroads, first of all, they said, well, a small union like yours can never shut this railroad down. It just would be impossible. Nobody would respect your picket lines. They were totally wrong. We were able to shut the railroad down completely.
It will call this country to a halt and get recognition for our skill. We were given an increase over and above the other workers in the industry that recognized our skill in 1971. That fight continues today.
This was a tumultuous time for the rail industry, a time of bankruptcies, abandonments, company failures, and mergers. And when the private sector no longer could run the trains, the government tried to do it. Amtrak was established as a national passenger network, but has never had enough money to run a proper railroad. Labor made gains, however, with the passage of the Federal Railroad Safety Act and OSHA. By our 75th anniversary in 1976, the industry was changing dramatically. After waging a campaign for years to be classified as safety-sensitive workers, signalmen finally were brought under the Hours of Service Act, recognition that was long overdue. And our new president, Tom Bates, faced a host of new challenges. Conrail, which was created through the efforts of the rail unions working with Congress to preserve rail freight in the Northeast, went into operation in 1976. Essentially a railroad owned by Congress, it worked so well it was privatized in just 11 years. And 10 years later, it was bought out by CSX and the Norfolk Southern. The Staggers Rail Act of 1980 deregulated the railroads and turned our industry on its head once again. With deregulation came increased abuse of working conditions. Wages lagged behind national trends, and worker safety remained a big issue. At the same time, changes in technology brought new demands on the skills of signalmen.
When I started to work on the railroad equipment was basically relay. Then we started going little by little to electronic equipment. Well, today we still have a lot of the equipment that's out there is the relay logic, but you may go from relay logic on one location and go into the most modern electronic could be communication-based signaling, or it could even be satellite-controlled signaling at another location.
From the earliest days, training has been a critical part of the professional life of a signalman.
We have a training committee that is now working with the American Association of Railroads and the major Class 1 railroads to put in place a standardized training that would be then put on each railroad.
Today, training takes on an even greater priority as we look to the future. A future where increasing numbers of BRS members will install and maintain the systems that will keep commuter and high-speed rail operations safe. Safety has always been at the top of the Brotherhood's agenda, but it's also an area in which we have constantly faced opposition from management. From 1988 to 1994, there were 31 trackside deaths, 11 of them signalmen. Our union fought hard for railway worker protection regulations, which finally came in 1997. Since their enactment, just one member of the Brotherhood has been killed on the roadway.
Every member should have a right to leave for work and come back home that same day, the feeling that when they leave there that they're going to come back home in the same condition to their family and everyone, not lose their life and not have to worry about that during the day. And that's one of the reasons we work so hard on that.
Grade crossings have been around as long as railroads, but it wasn't until 1995 that we finally got federal grade crossing regulations, following a battle of more than 20 years. The railroads fought us every step of the way, and in order to win this fight, we had to show that they were not regulating themselves as they said they were. It was in order to conduct fights like these that the Brotherhood established the Signalmen's Political League in 1972 and began to make its presence felt in government offices and the halls of Congress.
Clearly, it is the issue. We've got to continue to be involved in our activities in Washington because of the fact that our benefits, we're under a special act, Railway Labor Act. Our minor disputes are governed by a statute. We handle all our claims and grievances out of a statute.
We're the most regulated craft in the railroad industry, and everything that we get accomplished is through either regulatory proceedings or through a law that's changed for us. And we found in a hurry that a stroke of a pen can take away everything that we can negotiate. So we have to keep a very active presence in Washington.
Many times in politics, it's not who you are, but it's how much you can give. And our numbers sometimes hurt us there. Sometimes we have to have bigger numbers to get the doors open and have our voice heard. But we believe once the doors are open, we need to be the voice, not someone else.
We have to have a union to fight for signalmen's rights, or we won't have any of the rights that we even accomplished over this past 100 years. The difference today is that we don't have to hide to be called a union. We are a union. We're proud to be called a union. But the fight for survival as a union is just as hard today as it was 100 years ago.
The fight to give signalmen a better life and the will to accomplish that is just as strong today as it was 100 years ago. Ours is a proud craft, staying on track in our quest for decent wages, safety, training, and respect. What began in Altoona so long ago, our union, is now bright with promise. We have indeed come far in our first century of service and solidarity. Ours is a brotherhood born of trust and driven by a quest to make life better. We are a unique craft, an enduring union. We are the Brotherhood of Railroad Signalmen.